Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. I am thrilled today to be going back over to France. We recently visited there in episode, I want to say 214, with Michel Couvret, a blending house and now distillery in the Burgundian region of France. Today, we're over in the Loire Valley to talk about La Piautre. I hope I'm pronouncing that okay. Joining me to talk about this distillery in the Loire Valley is Inès. And Inès, welcome on.
Thanks. Hi, David. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. So as people who listen know, I've been particularly fascinated with European and I'd say French distilleries and production recently. That's all thanks to La Maison Enveliere's Version Française project, which has given me access and knowledge to just a bunch of new distilleries that I had never heard of or realized that existed. Thank you to their team for making this introduction and for making this happen. So let's start off where we like to start off with this podcast. So let's talk about what is the origin story of this distillery?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was not at the start. I've been working at the distillery for around 5 to 6 years. But the project started in the early 2000s. Around 25 years ago, Vincent, the co-founder, was kind of in, he likes to say, in his crisis. He basically wanted to change jobs and find something that was a bit more close to the earth. So basically something that grows on the earth. So he was interested in barley, and it started with beer with one of his friends. So they founded the brewery 2004, and the idea behind that was to get as close as possible as to the barley, the crops that we have in the area, because in the area we actually do produce quite a lot of barley for the breweries. But the malting industry was and still is made around very big companies on an industrial scale. So basically, the barley was grown here and was shipped to the other side of France and got back to the brewery in bags to be brewed. So the idea started at the beginning, but it was only put into effect around 10 years later with the maltery, and the maltery led to the distillery. That's the big picture. And basically, well, at first, and we can get into more details about that afterwards, but basically when Vincent decided to build the floor malting maltery, people told him, you're going to have so many problems with the floor malting because we do not do that anymore, even though that was the traditional way to malt. So he said, well, let's not take any risk. We'll distill the first batch. So the actual 5 first batches, I think, were distilled with the help of a local distiller. And he realized it was actually quite an interesting process and decided to continue with the distillation. And instead of distilling beer, he started to distill whiskey. And that's how the story of the distillery started around 12 years ago.
So it's funny because along with not knowing prior to La Maison Enveliere's project, not knowing that there was a huge French distilling scene for whiskey, I should say. And we knew brandy, cognac, etc., but not for whiskey. I feel like it's kind of underknown that there's a significant brewing tradition there too. I mean, you're talking from the Loire Valley, and when I hear that, all I hear is wine. And it's a significant region. What are the largest river or the longest river in France? Central France. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site for much of it. Flows east to west into the Atlantic. But we certainly see plenty of French wine coming over from the region. But I'll leave it to my more beer knowledgeable friends to say otherwise, but I feel like we don't know much about the beer. So what is the brewing scene like?
Well, it's very active at the moment. I think, I'm not sure about my data, but I think there's around 2,500 microbreweries in France. They have a very smaller scale than the small breweries in the US, for sure. But when Vincent and Yann, his friend, co-founded the La Piautre, they were part of the very first ones to bring back brewing on an artisanal scale. There were a few that had already started before. Yeah, we in France, more than 25 years ago, we only drank industrial beer, mostly in industrial beers. So yeah, there were pioneers on this part. Yeah, we are brewing and distilling in a place that's very much a place to make wine. But we do have some exchanges with the vineyards and the wine community, because for some of our beers we like to age them in wine casks. We also like to put a bit of grapes in some of our beers. Obviously, it's just very limited editions on very small quantities, but it's still very fun to do. And we also have this kind of vineyard approach in the way we distill, because we are a very small scale distillery. And we'll talk about the maltery and the links we have with the farms that provide us with the cereals. But we distill based on the quantities of malt that they harvest every year. So it's more or less the approach a vineyard would have. They make wine based on the grapes harvested at the end of the season.
It's a great harvest year, more volume. Not a great harvest year, less volume, and that's just what you have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do apologize too, because of a typo on my end in the title of my research. I errantly said La Piautre earlier. It's La Piautre.
La Piautre, yes.
Piautre. Okay. And in French, what does that mean?
It's actually a very local word. I don't know how to translate that, but basically this is a kind of a dialect. We have these in France in very specific regions. It represents the name of, I don't know how to say that in English, but the thing to stir the boats on the Loire River. So they have...
Oh, like the oars?
Yeah, the thing at the end to make sure you...
Oh, the rudder.
Yeah, exactly.
The rudder, yeah.
The boats on the rivers have specific shape because the rivers are not very deep, and so yeah, that's the name of this thing. And the idea was to use a name of something that's really linked to the Loire Valley, to our terroir, and you'll see that we have lots of links with it that come in many forms. Whether it's the name or the labels, the maltery, etc. We are very attached to where we live and where we produce our beers and whiskies, and it had to be in the name. So that's the idea behind it. Very hard to pronounce in English. Not the best name to think about exports, but that was not the idea 20 years ago. So it's fine.
I fully admit I am not the best with pronunciations or accents. So
it's all right.
I've consider myself pretty good with English, and that's about where I'll stop my my expertise. Unfortunately, languages have never been a strong suit for me. So, but I wanted to make sure I got that right before I forgot. So, I think the next logical place to go is the malt house. You mentioned there's a lot of malt grown. Sorry, not a lot of malt, a lot of barley grown in the region. And before you had the malt house, it was harvested there, but then had to be sent across France to be malted and then back over. And I think it's notable. It's something that has come up in a number of smaller distilleries around the world, that there just aren't malt houses near some of these more remote places, so they've got to send it out or make their own. But also here in the U.S., where there are many malt houses because of so many breweries, it still can be quite a journey for the barley to get to the malt house and then back to the distillery. And yet only of the, 2,500, 3,000 distilleries in the U.S. right now, maybe a dozen, have their own malt houses. And 2 of those are thinking of closing them. So it's something quite rare here as well.
Well, it was really complicated to set up this malt house. Basically because, as I mentioned before, we had this, and in France, we still have this very industrial way of producing malts. And if I'm not wrong, I think France is one of the, if not the first exporter of malt in the world. Maybe I'm really wrong with that number. We'd have to check. But yeah, the way we used to make malts on a very small scale with floor malting was kind of abandoned, at least in France. But it was the only way for Vincent to make the malt house happening. Mostly because it takes quite a lot of funding to have a modern malt house. So it was not possible. And he also had the idea of building a malt house the traditional way, because it was the best way for him, at least, to see the germination process, to see all of these steps to transform the barley into malt. So to learn all of that, he had to train with Emmanuel Faucillon. He's the pioneer of floor malting in France, and we had to do a lot of tests and try to learn the hard way, because it's actually quite complicated. We also had the help of one specific farm at first, and now we have 12 of them that we work with every year. We try to build strong partnerships with them, because these are key partnerships. They are at the start of our product, and at first it was a very small scale malt house. It is still small scale, but at first it was two tons, so 2 areas, I don't know if you say it like that, of 1 ton of malt. And now we've built a bigger malt house that's a bit more practical to use, and it's twice 3 tons per week that we can malt. So it's still very small, yet it answers most of our needs in terms of malting. We have full autonomy for the malts of our whiskies. For the beer, we still have to buy around 50% of very special malts, specialty malts, such as for the amber beers or stouts, etc., because our kiln is not made for that kind of temperature required for the kilning of the specialty malts. So yeah, it's not easy. It took a lot of work, and it's obviously quite expensive, but we feel that it's really interesting to make a product almost from the very start, because obviously we do not grow our own barley, but we have these very strong connections with the people who do, and we can see the impact of the climate, how from the barley from one farmer to another may have to be malted a different way. So this takes a lot of work, and it really connects us to the cereals and how they are transformed into beers and whiskies. So it's sometimes really difficult, but it's really, really interesting.
It's very worth it. It's going to keep we usually shy away from the term terroir in whiskey because it's a little more complicated than in wine, but it really does keep you close to the land to do all this. And I mean, yeah, I was looking on your website, and you said that for malt, the distillery itself, so the brewery is not quite self-sufficient for malt. Like you said, you have to bring in some of the more specialty ones just for practicality, but the distillery is potentially 100% self-sufficient with malt, which is fantastic. You're able to do smoking on site as well. You do some with peat, which we'll get into as well. And you're able to also do custom malting for farmers and brewers in the region. So you've got partnerships with the farmers on one side and with breweries as well.
It's still on a very small scale, but we try to develop that. Obviously, there's the fact that the malt house cost a lot. We had to build everything ourselves with the help of obviously many suppliers, and it was built right after COVID. Not the best moment. So yes, basically it's a very expensive project. So being able to sell malt to other brewers helps. It also helps when like in 2025. So basically our partnerships with the farmers work based on a surface. So if the yield is better a specific year, we'll have more barley to malt, but we have to do something with it. And this is for us an opportunity to sell it to other breweries who value the local ingredients. We also have partnerships on the long term with the smaller breweries who order malt from us, or they order a specific malting of the barley that they will bring from another farm. And we also have farmers who want to have their specific beer, for example, and they say, well, I have this quantity of barley, can you make something with it for me? Which is very interesting for us because it makes a lot of sense to use something that has been grown very locally. It brings up many projects, especially on the beer side, with different breweries People are more and more interested in where the ingredients of what they drink come from, even though it's obviously a very different approach in the brewing industry compared to the whiskey industry. In the whiskey industry, having our own malt house, being able to make the product from the malting process is very valued. It is not yet the same in the brewing industries. I'm sure it will change because people are very eager to know more about what they drink, where it comes from.
Absolutely. And before going into more detail on your production, I'd love to hear your, this could be professional, this could be personal, but your take on the sense of place and the terroir of the Loire Valley and where La Piautre is.
Well, we talked about that with Vincent because I asked him what his vision was about that, because obviously we are a very small team, and even though we share La Piautre's values, we have our own interpretation of that. But we are very close to the Loire Valley. Most of us grew up here, and there is a very intense sense of place. In the way we make our whiskies, it takes many forms. So the first part is having these partnerships with the farms. It may not seem important on some point of view, but for us it's really important because without them, our products could be made with any malt. It could come from anywhere, and it would not mean the same for us. We also have the sense of place on what I said before, kind of vineyard approach. If the climate changes in a bad way, for example, at the moment we are hoping for no more rain for a few weeks so that we can move on with planting the barley for the next harvest. So this connects us to where we are, the people we work with. We also have this approach in the way we mature, age our whiskies. We try to use as much as possible local casks. So we have ex-wine cask. We have the cave, also the Montsoreau cave, which I know you wanted to talk about. So it takes many, many different forms. We try to kind of pay homage to the Loire Valley through the names of our whiskies. It's kind of a big, messy thing, but the idea is that we love where we live, where we brew and distill our whiskies. It's really important for us, and we want people who buy our whiskey to understand that it was made with this approach to, I don't know how to say that in English, but to value our terroir and what it has to bring.
Yes, we would definitely talk about the cave and the casks too, because I know this is skipping production, so normally we do talk about production, fermentation, and distillation, but just because it just mentioned, so the casks, as you said, you've got ex-wine casks, French oak. This is French whenever possible from, like you said, from the Loire Valley and Limousin. And
yes.
I'm sure I've had one or two Limousin oaks from Dancing Goat Distillery in the U.S. because they're famous for their rye made in those casks. But other than that, we don't always hear the specific French oak that is used. Usually we only hear it if it's from one of the protected forests, or if it's some unique feature, like Stork Club in Germany uses the Napoleonic oak from southern France. That still, some of them still has the bullets from Napoleon's armies, kind of thing in the trees. So one of the casks I wanted to ask about that I hadn't heard of before was a red cognac cask.
So it's not a red cognac cask per se. It's a Pinot des Charentes. So okay. This is made in the same region. So as many young distilleries, we've experimented quite a lot with finishes. So this was a finish that we've done quite a few times. So basically the way we mature our whiskies is quite dynamic, which is possible because we don't have many barrels that are aging. It's around 400. It's still possible for us to have this dynamic approach. We use ex-wine casks, so Chenin, which is a white wine, white type of grape that grows here and that is very famous in the Loire Valley. Ex-cognac cask and new French oak. This is the base of all of our whiskies. We do like to experiment with different kind of of casks. And we've done this with the Pinot de Charente, red and white, which brings that kind of a very round and fruity, but also spicy notes that are very easy to drink. It speaks to the people around here because Pinot de Charente is very known in France. So yeah, it spoke to people, and it was, even though it's always always uncertain what finish will taste like, it's also an easy way to experiment and try different things. So this is one of the few that we've tried, and it's actually quite good. So we have a few in the cellar waiting. We'll try to keep them a bit longer this time.
But I didn't realize that is what it meant. I love Pinot cask finishings. There are not a lot of them here in the U.S. It's another kind of like unknown or lesser known fortified wine. Most of the time, even if you ask what it is here, I'm not sure people would be prepared to ask like red or white. Just, oh, it's Pinot, whichever one it is. I'm curious for your tastes, having it both be familiar to you and used in the whiskey finishings. Do you prefer red or white Pinot de Charente?
Actually, I don't have a preference. That's not the kind of thing that I drink, that I prefer to drink. That's not my drink of choice. We couldn't find a very big difference on our whiskeys because every finish is always a bit different. Sometimes we blended two finishes, one with white and one with red. We're not sure about the impact. What we can say, though, is that every edition of this Pinot de Charente finish was a bit different from the other. But the thing that we can always taste is this kind of a dried grapes, raisins, and spices, and something that's not on the sweet side, but very round, which really much resembles Pinot de Charente.
I really hope that more producers here in the U.S. start using it. I know it's not easy to get casks over, but it's just different. You know, I find this is my own feeling, I find a lot of wine casks don't always work well with whiskeys, certainly American whiskeys, I should say, and yet this one does. It's just, I don't know, it matches up well. Maybe it's those spice notes in the raisin, and the French oak, I'm sure, also just bolsters all of those flavors.
And it's very interesting that you mention the fact that wine casks do not always work with whiskey, because when we started to make whiskey, since we are very interested in using our local resources, we're in the Loire Valley, we make wine. So the idea was to only use ex-wine cask. We soon realized that it was not always a very good choice. This is why we've started to incorporate ex-cognac cask and new oak to have something more structured. And we now found that using wine cask for finishes, or at least as part of our blends, of the blending process of our whiskeys, is more relevant than just using only them. It kind of don't know how to say that. It makes something very, very tense. It's the whiskey does not develop the way it does in ex-cognac or new French oak casks. So we use them very differently now, and we actually have a specific whiskey that's called Empreintes, which is aged for around 5 years in our cave. And after that, we bring it back to our dry cellars and transfer it for a 6-month finish in ex-Chenin, so white wine cask. And it brings the very fruity notes, apples and pears, and this kind of buttery aspects of the whiskey. That's really interesting, but it's much better having it just as a finish rather than the full maturation process, even though we've had some exceptions. But I mean, that's the magic of maturing whiskeys in oak. You never really know how it's going to go.
Sure. So let's jump back to production. You kind of alluded to this question, but I'd love to ask it outright, which is, you have the brewery and the distillery. In some ways, they might overlap because whiskey is ultimately distilled beer, not always drinkable beer, but that's up to the distillery. So you mentioned that there are a number of beers that require outside maltings or for specialized roasting levels and toastings, etc. Are the whiskeys being distilled all from a beer that you would make, or is there kind of a separate beer recipe for the whiskeys, and then you have the other beers that go out for consumers?
These are very different recipes. We have our core range of beers that we make all year long and limited releases. For the whiskeys, we have separate recipes based on what we want to make. So we mostly make whiskeys with malted barley. We also experiment with all the other malted cereals. And we also use a different yeasts for whiskey because we want a better yield, higher ABV. But we also have this brewery approach because our fermentation lasts for a week. And I know it's a bit longer than in the Scotch whiskey industry, for example. So we are kind of in between.
A week fermentation, that's significant. And I love when that happens. You get so many more flavors at that back end as well. Are you willing to share which yeast you use for the whiskey distillation, or whiskey fermentation, I should say?
I would, but I actually don't have the answer to that question. I work on the commercial part and I try to get as much technical information as possible, but I don't. I know we buy it. We would like to have our own yeast, but it's obviously a very complicated process. It's even more complicated since we have the brewery. And we can't risk cross-contamination with our beers. And we also have a problem of having enough space to make all of that. So yeah, for the moment, it's a distiller's yeast, nothing fancy, nothing very original, but it works for us. We've actually recently experimented with different yeast strains. We've tried with I forgot the name. But yeah, we tried with different ones. The new make is pretty different from one strain to another, but we haven't found one that would legitimate a change in our recipe. Which would be interesting would be to have the same kind of maturation and see in a few years how it evolves, which is probably what we're going to do. But yeah, since we're only 11 years old, it's still a very, very young distillery. So we like to experiment, but we don't have a lot to look back on what we've tried.
Understood. Listeners to this podcast will know that I'm a huge fan of these kind of yeast trials and seeing how they go. I'd be really interested to see if I think particularly how wine yeasts and local yeasts like that would affect it. Just I've seen other distilleries use a mix of the kind of a distiller's yeast to begin with for the yield, like you said, to make sure you're getting as much sugars eaten as possible at the highest ABV, but also co-pitching a local yeast or doing open top fermentation. I know it's harder for you guys because you're the brewery, so the cross-contamination issue, but pitching either local or wine yeast to give these very different flavors. It can be very fruity, and I'm blanking on the name of the distiller I'm thinking of that used, I think, Chardonnay yeast or champagne yeast, and it added exactly what you think it would, like this very bright white grape fruitiness, even a little effervescence in there. But as I said, you can only do what you can because you can't risk the beer supply, you can't risk the cross contamination. You're right, at 11 years old, even having 400 plus casks aging is significant while running a brewery at the same time. If you were, it's just a lot to manage while still exploring your own malt house, the malts from 12 farms. And you said sometimes you have to deal with each farm's malt or barley. I'll use that interchangeably. I shouldn't, but I do. You have to deal with them a little bit differently. When a farmer brings the barley to you, let's say it's a great harvest and you've got a lot to use. As you said, you'll maybe make some for other breweries and such. When you look at it and you're talking about having to deal with this barley differently from producer to producer, what about the barley necessitates you having to work with it differently?
So do you mean how do we cope with differences from one farm to another?
Yeah, like how you cope with it. Is it a matter of, is it like a different strain of barley, a different head size, even things like that?
Well, the farms we work with use different varieties. I don't know if it's the correct word. Planet, Sebastian, Ouverture, which are very, very common. We do run some tests with them on different barleys because we are an organic mortuary brewery distillery. So there's not as much research because most of the research on the malting process is focused on on yield. In the organic field, the yields are divided by 3. So this is a very different approach. So we try to do our own research. We do some trials with the farmers that are interested in that. So it can be, I don't know how big the surfaces are, but it could be on this field, which are obviously on a very smaller scale than in other countries. We can try with this one, see how it adapts to the climate here, because the last few years have had very different weathers and climates. So we do have to adapt to that. What we also do is that after the barley has been harvested by the different farms, we get samples and we run some tests on all of them. So we have a dedicated person for the malt house, Brice. He's in charge of the quality of the malt, of all the malting process. And at this time of the year, he has the help of one of our brewers, Gabriel, because it takes quite a lot of time. And for example, if we realize that one harvest is not going to work with that specific farm, it's part of our partnership. We try to build strong partnerships to make sure we pay the farmers the correct amount for the work they do, to make sure that if one specific year it does not meet our quality requirements, we are able to not take this malt or take it to this barley or take it to the malt house and process it differently. So it takes a lot of observation, experience that Brice had to gain with time, with errors. At first, it was you could hear the brewing team being a bit mad at him because it was quite complicated at the brewery. But we've tried to gain this experience to make the most of every harvest, and it's now quite rare that we say no, we can't take this. Specific harvest is not going to work for us. With the tests and this experience, we can adapt a bit more and change the length of the different germination process parts.
That's the best part of having your own malt house, is you can do that. If you were sending it out somewhere else, you have to trust that malt house is going to look at that field and adapt to that. So I know it's incredibly expensive, as you said. It's incredibly time intensive, labor intensive. It's where the term monkey shoulder comes from, turning those shovels over and the rakes over. But it is worth it in that sense to keep really the field by field, sometimes region, of the flavor and type you're going for. So I admire that. I can't say how much I admire that as part of your process. Actually, this is a question I was thinking too, that sometimes comes up when you have a brewery and a distillery. Very often when a distillery is starting up, and I'll use the U.S. as an example, but I think it applies to Scotland as well and to other regions. They'll make a white spirit, a gin, a vodka, an aquavit, to keep the lights on while the whiskey ages. In your case, you had the brewery going, so there was already cash flow, there were tourism, sales going on there. You do have a gin, a botanical spirit, but it doesn't seem from an outside perspective that you would necessarily need it. Like, it's a lovely thing to have, and I'm sure I haven't got to taste it, so I can't comment on it. But other than that, why not have a gin? But it didn't seem a necessity, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes total sense. It's not a necessity, and it's actually... So I think you've understood that we have this approach of making everything from scratch, or at least as much as we can. We are not very good supporters of the EU regulation on making gin with the neutral spirits. For us, and we only speak for us, for the way we want to make a gin, it would not be logical to buy a neutral spirit that has been industrially made if we can also make the base spirits for a gin. So we make it the way we used to do before. And so it's not easy to sell because you have to explain everything. You have to explain what the new make is, what a botanical spirit is, which is basically a gin that you can't call gin. But we wanted to make the best of the different cereals that we malt. So our gin is 60% malted wheat, 30% malted barley, and 10% malted rye. And we did the 2 first distillation with our Charente stills. The 2 last distillations are not made in-house because we don't want the botanicals to have an impact on the still. So it's made by a small distiller not far from us on Cognac stills. But this is really something that we want to have fun with. We've just developed a second gin that's based on our beer spirits. So in order not to waste beer that's not good to drink as a beer, we prefer to distill it, and we try to experiment with different kind of botanicals, which is fun. But yeah, it's just a few bottles per year, but it's really interesting. And this is kind of I don't know the correct word, but yeah, since we do not agree with the way we should be doing gin, it's kind of a funny thing to make and to talk about. And I think it says a lot about the way we want to make our different products.
I hear you. There are, I think of, for example, like a distillery in Scotland that wants to make a really good, like just a single malt, but they can't. They want to make not a single malt. I'm thinking of one that wants to make a mixed grain spirit, but because of SWA regulations, they can't call it that. Because of EU regulations, they can't call it. They can't release it as a whiskey under 3 years, even though it could be delicious at 2. So I understand there's a standardization that is sought, but also it stifles on certain things. Yeah. So I hear you on that. And you mentioned that you have actually, before I get to the stills, that you're experimenting with the malthouse as a smokehouse. You've used oak, beech, birch, and alder in that. So I'll admit I've had beechwood smoked, not from your distillery, but from other malt houses, and I've had alder smoked. Alder I was not a huge fan of. It was a little too strong. But the beech was actually quite pleasant. What made you want to try these particular woods, and how's your success been with them?
Well, most of the things we do come from the fact that Vincent, the co-founder, likes to experiment and try very different things just to understand how it works and what's the result. So yeah, everything that happened here is based on an opportunity. So it started with peat, because the first French importer of peat is situated 20 kilometers away from the distillery. So we started with some, I don't know, scraps that they could not use, and we bought it from them, and we thought, yeah, well, let's try to smoke some more with it. It tasted good, so we kept doing it, and we built a bigger smoke house, which is still quite small. It's 400 kilos per batch, which is quite small, and it takes 4 days to have it's a long process. And so we started to experiment with different kinds of wood just to have fun with it. Obviously, some of our tests are not very good. So yeah, with the oak, it's a bit too harsh so far. So we just let it rest in the barrels, and we'll see if in a few years, or maybe in many years, it will taste better. The beech was really, really good. We are a big fan of this product. We've released a few editions of this smoked whiskey, which is not unique, but you can't find many of them in France because we are most used to peated whiskies, but we think it brings a very different approach to smoked whiskies. With birch, it's still in the barrels. So far it tastes good, but we are still waiting to use it. And alder, we've smoked the malt, but it has not yet been brewed. And we have to maybe slow down a bit on the test, because we have to make whiskey with it at some point.
You were with the peat too. You said that you had mentioned in previous conversation that you randomly started with Irish peat.
Yeah, we started with Irish peat because the importer I was talking about imports Irish peat. So our idea was never to import peat and use it to smoke malt. It's always to use resources that we can find nearby. But this importer was bought by a bigger one. I don't know how it happened, but basically they said, "Oh no, we're not selling this very small scraps to this distillery. We're not going to do that anymore." So we had no other resource, and it kind of happened randomly that one of our clients said he had a plan for a French supply of peat, which was quite surprising because the peat bogs in France are all protected areas. But basically, we've built this partnership around And I don't know how to explain that, but basically to make sure that the path in this peat bog are well maintained, they extract a little bit of peat, and what we need is so small compared to what they have to extract that they agreed to sell it to us. So we've started the trials 2 years ago, and so far it tastes quite differently to the Irish peat, which was really from the land. Here it has more of salty notes, even though this is very different from peat from Islay, for example. It's really, really different. So yeah, we experiment with that. We don't know how long it's going to take, and obviously we'll make what we can with what we have, because we know it's a very it's a resource that takes quite a lot of time to happen. So as long as we find peat like that, we'll continue to experiment with it. Experimenting with wood is another way of having smoked whiskies in a different way.
And this new peat source, again, please do correct my pronunciation on this, but from Marais de Brière.
Yes, Marais de Brière, exactly. Good pronunciation.
Not bad, I'll take it. So yes, as you said, I loved how you already pointed out that the Irish peat was more from the land, and this new source is more closer to maritime, not quite Islay, but more like that. The only experience that I had with Irish peat is two expressions from Waterford Distillery, and were, I don't want to say that I liked or disliked them, because I don't think that's fair. It was that it was such a different flavor than I'm used to in peat that I was like, I don't know where this is coming from. This is just, it's totally different. So I hear you when you say that this new source is also very different. It's may not be as local as ideally you would like, but it's of France, number one. So it's already a step closer. And yeah, I'd love to see this. I always think about, there's so much peat in existence, way more than we think about, way more, like something like 20% of the landmass of 20% of landmass has peat bogs of some kind. Massive. Huge carbon sinks, great for the environment, hence, as you said, they're protected areas. And trying the peat from all these different areas shows just how different you can get from very micro distances, or as different as, Islay versus New Zealand, South Island peat. Other than knowing it's kind of smoky and earthy, otherwise you might not know it's the same product. So I look forward to hearing more, in the future about what your experiments show in these different flavors.
Well, we still have to wait, but it's kind of promising. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to build expectations, but it's really exciting.
So the next thing I want to touch on is the still setup. As I said, you've got two Charente style stills. Started with a 1500 liter, now also have a 2500 liter still. This was a still type I was not familiar with until I spoke with Bren, and then later with Charbet distillers over here in California, who also have a Charente style still. So this is an unfamiliar style for those, especially in the US. And I should note also, these are direct wood fired stills. So what, I guess, made us all choose the style of still, and what does it do for the whiskey?
Basically, well, it's the easiest to find secondhand because, as you know, it's quite expensive. So we actually started with the 2,500 liters, and now we have a second.
Okay, so I reversed those.
It's all right, don't worry. We also wanted to have this traditional approach of distilling. Obviously, we are very interested in doing things the traditional way. And the last reason was that Vincent got training on Charente stills. So he said, why not use them? They've been working for centuries and it's pretty good. I can find some secondhand, and this is how it started. But the very first batches of whiskey that we sold were from Gilles Boudier. He's an independent distiller. He has Cognac stills, which are very specific, I think, to France and to our region. It's made to distill fruits, and they are mobile, so you can move them if you want. Other distilleries are using them. So we started with these, and when we realized it was interesting and good, we purchased the first and the second Charente still, and we're really happy with it. And we actually use the cognac methods for the cuts with the heads, second, and the tails. So we've learned this approach and we apply it.
Can you go into more detail on what those cognac style cuts are? Just because I'm not sure that I know them or have heard them before.
Obviously, I'm no specialist, but so we do some early cuts on the late cuts on the heads to make sure we don't have too much of them in the heart. It's not interesting in our new make. So we cut the heads on the first distillation and the second. Obviously, we always recycle them on the first distillation. So we cut the second, which is after the hearts, and then the tails. The second, they go in the second distillation, and the tails go in the first distillation. Sorry, it's still a work in progress for us to find what time we stop to cut from the heart to the second. Obviously, what we do is for our peated whiskey, we have wider cuts on the tails to make the best of the peated flavors. But we are not yet fully satisfied with it, so we are still working on them to find the best cuts for us.
So that third part in the process, the second, if I'm hearing that right, I've never heard that before. Where we usually just have heads, hearts, tails. That's it. The recycling, sure, that does take place either to redistill or to charge the next distillation. But it's only this additional area is like it's after the heart, so it's after the best part of it, if you will, the core of what you want from the distillation. But it's before those tails, which you can get really, really heavy. And like you said, for the peat, you want to include that because you're getting more of those heavier oils and compounds. I'm trying to think of the right question to ask of like what that is. It's just never, I mean, we're getting into including bonus episodes, like around the 250 episodes of the podcast. And I've never heard this phrase before. And whenever that happens, I struggle to figure out the question that I want to ask about it.
I feel you. Unfortunately, I'm not the best person to answer because I understand your questions. I'm currently studying this. And yeah, at first I was like, we make cuts like in Scotland. I don't know the difference, but it's really an approach that you will find in cognac. And to have the heads, sorry, I'm mixing French and English. So the heads collecting the hearts. And the difference with the second and the tails is that the second, you will usually recycle them in the next distillation, what we call bonne chauffe, which is the same wording, the same phrase that you will find in cognac. And the tails are going in the next first distillation. Another cut that we make. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you much more about it because it's still a learning process. Yeah, mostly that's because we learned to do it this way and it suits us, so we keep doing it.
If it works, it works. And I do like this idea too, and I want to point this out that as you've got your own stills, they're on site, they're not mobile, and I still have not done an episode fully on Armagnac, and I really need to because it's one of those spirits that I don't consume very often, but I really enjoy when I do. And they're very much known for this small production, very small sometimes, like a barrel or two a year production. And because of that, there's no point in them having their own stills. So they have this itinerant still that goes around the 3 regions that qualify for Armagnac and just goes to farm by farm, vineyard by vineyard to have them use the equipment, and then they move on to the next one to have them distill. So having the founder learned on that and then move to your own stills, and I think it also talks to his vision that, all right, we're going to be around for a while. We're going to be making maybe not, as you said, these industrial size quantities, but enough that we're going to have several hundred barrels aging. We're going to try these different things out. And we want to always have a still or two now available. If we want to say, hey, we've got some alder smoked malt over here, let's see what it does. And you have the ability to do that without waiting for a still to become available for you.
Yeah, and at first it was also a way not to commit to buying stills, just to try distilling. So Gilles Boudier has been and still is an important partner for us in our research. Obviously, as I mentioned before, he distills our beer spirits and our gin. And he also happens to distill a few things here and there for us, because it's on a smaller scale, or because we want to try different things. So it's really important for us, and without him, I don't know if we'd be making whiskey now.
Love it. That brings us to the maturation, and we've got to talk about these caves. So if I've got this right, troglodyte, truffle, Montsoreau cave. So 3 words I don't usually think about together.
So yeah, the Loire Valley has a lot of these caves with these specific stones that are very, how do you say that, when it can hide? I don't know how to say
I know
that.
what you're talking about. Like very porous or
Yeah, exactly. You usually find them under the vineyards. So we started with one dry cellar. Now we have 2 dry cellars that are on site. This cave is situated a few kilometers. I think it's 30 kilometers away from here. It has a magnificent view over the Loire River, and it started, as Vincent likes to say, well, first because there is a nice view. Also because he had a lot of interest in experimenting with the different maturation conditions. So yeah, it was really in the interest in having a different aging approach for our whiskies, which was not the easiest to do, because obviously this is the whiskey behaves pretty differently compared to our dry cellars. Obviously, well, you discussed it with Jean Arnaud. We lose less volume of whiskey in the cave compared to our dry cellar. So the ABV doesn't change much, and the whiskey develops very different aromas. So we have this mineral aspect of our whiskey that we've had a lot of difficulties to understand and to make good whiskey out of it. At first, it was just a few barrels that we, I think, incorporated in our the blend of our signature whiskey. Then it was with a very unique Chenin barrel made into a single cask that was really the exception I was talking about earlier, having a ex-wine cask that was really good on its own. And now we are able to age a few of our barrels over there and transfer them to our dry cellars and have these white wine cask finishes that are really interesting. And for us, it's kind of the complete process, having local barley malted in-house, brewed in-house, distilled in-house, and matured in a very specific and unique cellar that we can find in this Loire Valley area, and then with a finish in Chenin cask. For us, this is kind of the ultimate thing we wanted to do. So that's really interesting, and the flavor profile is really unique, really different, which can sometimes be a bit surprising for our consumer clients. But yeah, this is really interesting. Obviously, this is not the most efficient way to age whiskey, because the access to the cave is really steep. We have to use just one of our very small trucks. We don't have electricity over there, so it's very artisanal approach, but it's really interesting.
Just before I forget, for clarification, when you say a dry cellar, this is something that's more familiar with cognac and brandy making as opposed to whiskey making for American audiences. So this generally has to do with the humidity in the area, right?
Sorry, can you repeat?
So for if when you have like a dry cellar versus a wet cellar, let's say, just dry versus wet, that's usually is it the humidity that's different?
Yeah, maybe I'm not using the correct word, but our main warehouses for maturation are quite classic, normal. I don't know how to say that. It doesn't have a very high humidity level compared to the cave, where it's much more different, much more humid.
Sure. Yeah, again, this is something that I only learned about in getting into Armagnac and brandies, when it would have on the label a dry cellar versus wet cellar, and I didn't know what that was. We don't consider that. Let me rephrase that. We don't. There's not a lot of that in the U.S., so we don't. It's not on our labels, you know. So I had to look at what is that and such, and eventually learned it's the humidity. It's another environmental condition that you're dealing with. Now, this is a question I did not ask Jean Arnaud that I'll ask you, and this is a really out there question, so feel free to say I have no idea. That's totally fine. So I think with Michel Couvret, he had the cave, like it was on his property. Oh no, I think he dug those caves. Like he had those caves made. So they weren't necessarily naturally occurring caves. In your case, you have this cave about 30 kilometers away. How does one acquire the rights to use a cave for maturation?
Well, first to find the caves, it's like you have to look for it. But I think Vincent had an opportunity, and I think he was kind of already looking for one. Well, then it's the not very fun part that you have to make a declaration to I don't know, people in administration in charge of taxes, and to say we are going to move barrels over there. So every time we move a barrel from one place to another, we have to fill out a very complicated and very boring documents. But obviously this is very much regulated for obvious reasons. So this is the not so fun part of doing that, but it's possible. We do it legally.
Oh yeah, no doubt on that. Not trying to get anyone in trouble for sure. I'm just thinking too. I mean, these are such minutiae of thought on this, but like the zoning requirements you have to get, or what we'd call zoning, just because you, as you said, you have no electricity there. One truck deep, up and down. It's not like you can install sprinkler systems in there. So I'm not even sure there's a question there. It's just this thinking through of what has to happen to once you get the cave, prepare it for whiskey maturation.
Well, lots of administration stuff. I'm glad I was not working for La Piautre yet. I'm glad I was not in charge of that, but it's possible. We're very glad it's possible.
And I know we're running low on time, but I want to also mention that Piautre is a signatory to the Natural Les Manifesto.
Yes, the New Natural. So this manifesto basically states that if you're a signatory, it means you agree to making spirits in a very traditional way, with the organic approach, respect of the barley for us, of the fruits of the wine that you may be using, which mostly makes spirits that are really good but really hard to sail, because usually you don't fall under the regulations that allow you to call a gin, because we use for us our own distillates, but some of our co-signatories use a wine base that they distill. So this is a very interesting approach, very geeky approach, but when you can't call your product what it's supposed to taste like, it's complicated. We are less impacted with whiskey because obviously we fall under the different naming regulation, etc. But it can be complicated. But for us, it was really important to be a signatory of this manifesto. And we are not the only whiskey distillery. Domaine de Haute Glace is also a signatory. They are very well known in the French whiskey industry. They are pioneers. They have also a very interesting approach on the malt. And if you talk to them, you'll understand what's behind this manifesto, which is kind of weird, but really interesting.
Domaine de Haute Glace is also on my list to talk to. I've got a number, but it's the top three after having you on now. They are on there, Ninkasi and Armoric, just because Armoric, I do enjoy their products, of course, but also because I think they're the biggest in France, and they've got such a history that I've got to go back to the beginning, But I love that thank you for calling out Domaine de Haute Glace for what they're doing there as well. Just in the last couple of minutes, I would love to know kind of where you feel that this brewery and distillery fits in the French whiskey scene. We know there are small micro distilleries. There's all the way up to Armoric. There are ones all over that are taking this concept of terroir and the different malts, and as you are, experimenting with a category that didn't exist a couple of decades ago and now is growing exponentially. So where do you feel that you fit in that?
Well, we are lucky. We are in kind of the second wave of the French whiskey distilleries. So we have just a little bit more experience compared to younger distilleries. I think we have a very different approach compared to cognac distilleries that start to make whiskey, distilleries that have already a very long experience of aging, maturation, etc. So we had to learn everything from scratch. I think what makes us unique is obviously the fact that we are one of the only distilleries that also have their brewery and malting house on site. And the fact that we have this approach based on the barley that grows in the area, to respect the environment as much as we can, and try to incorporate in our production process all of these local resources, whether it's the barley or the people who make the labels, etc. It's really a big teamwork that we are really interested in, and we are still quite small, and we will grow very slowly but steady but slowly, just to stay true to our values, to make a product that's really good from the field to the glass of whiskey that you're going to drink in the end.
Well, I'll note that in the show notes we'll have some links, of course, to the website, to social media, as well as a couple of places hopefully where you can get it. I know you're not distributed in the US right now. It's small distribution, so that's totally understandable. Through the La Maison Vellier project, there is at least one release that is available from you guys, and that can be found. It's not in the US, but it's available to ship to the US, which is a step in the right direction for distribution. And I believe you'll have on either Whiskey Exchange or Master of Malt. There are a couple of these massive sites that allow for shipping to the US, where La Maison du Whiskey does not, which frustrates me so much.
Oh, that's a shame.
I know they've got the best, even better than the Whiskey Exchange, with all due respect. I think La Maison du Whiskey has the best selection particularly of distilleries like Piautre, where you're smaller. You're not going to, it's an opportunity for people outside of France, outside of Europe, to learn about these smaller distilleries that are creating such incredible products. So I hope they resume shipping to the US soon. I understand why they don't, but I hope they do soon, so that more people can taste products like yours, including myself, because I want to taste them and know of everything we've spoken about, to see how that manifests in a glass, like you said.
I hope you'll be able to taste the version française from La Maison Vellier, the Petit Lot from our porter beer cask, which was one of the best releases selected by Marion and Mathieu that you've talked to. It really shows our work as a brewery and as a distillery in just one bottle. It's really interesting, and I know there's a few bottles left, and I really hope you can taste it, because it's one of our favorites, even though it was bottled by somebody else.
I will work with them to get a bottle, and I look forward to tasting it. So Inès, thank you so much for coming on, for talking. Applaud you. I hope I'm not breaking any trust by saying I know you were a little nervous about this coming in, but I think you did a fantastic job sharing the story of the distillery, the brewery, what you guys are doing. Hang on with me for just a moment after we finish recording, but it's really been a pleasure having you on to talk about La Piautre.
Well, thank you very much, David. It was great.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm going to try to add some new show notes, as I realized I do not have them on my new platform, so sorry about that, but we will have in the show notes, as I said, all the links, all the information, and hopefully for those top tier patrons, we're going to have a sampling of the whiskey soon enough. Thanks, everyone. See y'all next week.